Oh boy, this is the granddaddy of them all. The top 10 worst Nicktoons, in my opinion. As with any list, there are a few restrictions. They have to be Nicktoons, however, I don't apply the strictest definition to that word. For the purposes of this list, a Nicktoon is any cartoon that aired on Nickelodeon, Nick at Night, or Nicktoons Network. That means Canadian shows like Rocket Monkeys and Wayside are eligible for this list, despite not being original Nicktoons. The second rule is kind of self-explanatory. The shows on this list have to be bad. That might sound like something I shouldn't have to say for a worst list, but I only bring it up because that means the shows on this list have to actually be something I can say something about. I cannot put a show on this list just because it's boring. Boringness can contribute to a show's inclusion on this list, but it cannot be the only reason a show is included on this list. I've done this because if that were the case, we'd have some shows on this list like Doug that I personally don't like, but aren't necessarily bad in an objective sense. While, in my opinion, I feel like being bored by a piece of media is a weak reason to consider it bad, or in this case, consider it the worst of a subset of shows. But, to get into what I'm talking about, let's just get started with the list. I'm gonna bring this up further when we get to honorable mentions, but originally, up to the writing of the script for this video, Camp Coral was gonna be number 10. And to be honest, the show only made it onto the list by a hair. In fact, the two are very similar. Both are animated very cheaply just to make a quick buck, and both were spin-offs that were on air at the same time as the original show. And as a result, both shows have no reason to exist. But with this one, I actually found less reason to exist than Camp Coral. I know! And based on how much I ranted against Camp Coral, that's kind of impressive. I mean, the guy that was known for making live-action shows exclusively makes a cartoon no one was asking for. And this might have been excused if it was an original idea and not one of his already existing shows, just animated. And considering I never watched the original show this was based off, and how off-putting this show still was to me, I can't imagine this show had very much luck pulling in actual viewers that had never seen the original. About the show itself, the animation is probably the biggest problem, although the writing is not far behind. I'm pretty sure we're looking at the first television broadcast that was animated in Go Animate, because there is no way you could get this lack of production quality unless the computer that was used to animate this had a virus. The characters can't really be expressive, and when the only jokes this show likes to tell are the same cliches that got beaten to death in Dan Schneider's other shows, laughs are few and far between. And yes, this show is supposed to be a comedy. Plain and simple, this was a cash grab, because anyone that puts pride in their work would not let something like this come out. And that's the main problem. This is one of the last shows Schneider made before being fired by Nickelodeon, and it shows. Making a crappy, low-budget cartoon version of an already existing show when your bread and butter is live action seems like the final boss of all desperation moves. It's at a point where I'm even struggling to understand how this could have possibly worked. I mean, it's a show that already exists, that no one was even asking to be made into a cartoon. At least with the other shows on this list, and keep in mind this is number 10, so all of them are worse than this one, I can at least see the idea behind them. This show is one of the least creative cartoons I've ever seen. Even some of the worst cartoons ever made were still made out of some kind of creativity. So I'm not even going to spend any more time dignifying this show by talking about it. For number 9, I'm going to try to keep this one short, since I don't actually have that much to say about it. El Tigre is my number 9. This is going to be one of the more unpopular opinions on this list, but I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. For a show where good and evil seem to be the main themes, this show has a surprising lack of ethics, let alone good characters to project them onto. There isn't a single likable character on this show. Manny's father is a crybaby, Frida is the best friend character, but in no situation throughout this show did I ever think that Manny was better off because Frida was his best friend. The only character that I thought actually resembled what they were going for was the grandfather. I don't know if it's particularly fair to judge the show on this, because it could be due to executive meddling, but the production values in this show are awful. It feels like over half the characters in this show were voiced by the same voice actor as Mr. Crocker from The Fairly OddParents. The animation is fine, not great, but what gets me are the lazy attempts to create a Mexican atmosphere in this show. The most superficial and stereotypical aspects of Mexican culture are what's shown here, and it's not good enough. It just frankly is not good enough. Especially when the creator of this show is Mexican. I mean, they call it soccer and not football in this show. The theming just doesn't go deep enough. There's a lot of sombreros here, and the designs are based on Mexican wrestlers, but it's not enough. Certainly not enough beyond the superficial. From one bad culturally themed show to another, here we have 3 Delivery. One aspect of this show that was welcome at the time it was created was that it was an action show at a time when they were uncommon. The problem was that this being one of the only ones, it was even more of a shame that it was bad. The main problem with this show is its stilted animation, which you can see almost immediately. It's a style you could maybe get away with in a slice-of-life comedy, but in a martial arts show, it is imperative that the animation carries the martial arts in an interesting way. When you're animating only a few frames per second, anything that would be conveyed isn't conveyed properly, wasting the entire concept of the show. And that really is why the show is on this list. Bad animation is one thing, and it's something that you can get away with most of the time. The animation in South Park, for example, doesn't look very good. But the reason why it's excused there and not in 3 Delivery is because in 3 Delivery, it interferes with what the show is trying to do. In 3 Delivery, the reason you'd want to watch the show in the first place is completely destroyed by the animation, and nothing else here can save it. Are there good characters? Not really. None of them stood out to me, and in fact, nothing about this show really stood out to me besides the awful animation. And unfortunately, it isn't even the worst looking show on this list. I'm struggling to even come up with the words to describe this show. 2 of the most annoying characters combined with the most cliched plots you could put them in, conveyed with some of the worst TV-grade CGI animation I've ever seen. The titular characters are these 2 kids that never change out of their superhero costumes that they wear. But don't be fooled by thinking they actually fight crime. That might actually be good. Instead, they go around annoying people. This concept might have a prayer of actually working if these characters are charming in some way, but the only character that actually had thought put into them was Kyle, and he gets tormented in every episode. If you don't make these characters likable, then I get annoyed along with the other characters, which happens way too frequently with this show. Seriously, go watch a few episodes of Fanboy and Chum Chum, set a stopwatch, and stop it at the point when you want to murder them. For me, that point was 5 minutes into one episode, but for you it might be different. Oh yeah, and the animation quality was distractingly bad. A lot of the assets in this are two-dimensional, and it's especially easy to tell. This is very hard to mask with cheap CGI, and they don't even make an attempt at doing so. But maybe the distractingly bad animation quality was a blessing in disguise, since it distracted me from how annoying Fanboy and Chum Chum are. Am I harping on these 2? Yes, but it's that bad. Even the voice acting doesn't help. Fanboy's voice is tolerable, but some of the side characters have questionable voices, and Chum Chum is just Smellerby. There is no difference between these 2 voices, and yes, they were done by the same actor. Overall, just a show that doesn't do much right, but it isn't the worst at any one thing. I don't know exactly how this show is supposed to fit in. It aired on Nick at Night, which already makes it a rare breed, but it's also a stop-motion show, which is fairly unique. The sad thing is that almost nothing else about this show is unique. Have you heard of Homer Simpson? Oh, you have? Yeah, apparently the writers to this show have also heard of Homer Simpson, and they just decided to transplant him to be the main character of this show. This show uses the idiot father cliché, and sacrifices it on the altar of not giving a crap about anything else. The concept of this is that Glenn wants to go see this tree, so he packs his family away from their lives and makes them live in an RV just so he can see the tree. Yeah, there's a reason this kind of stuff is only in Family Guy cutaway gags. something like this is used in a Family Guy cutaway, you can forget about it in 2 seconds if it isn't funny. I can't believe I have to explain this, but that doesn't mean it works as the concept for an entire show. You've decided to rip off basically everything else from Family Guy, why not that? Glenn is essentially Peter Griffin, his wife is Lois, and the son is basically Chris. And they even have a dog. Except, instead of the dog being able to talk, this dog's gimmick is that it has a giant swollen anus, because that's not disgusting. I guess the only time they decide not to rip something off in this show is when it makes the show worse. For example, I'd prefer if they just ripped off Meg or Lisa instead of having the daughter treat her life like it's a business. There was not a good decision made in the making of this show.